biggest thing about fame that I learned very quickly, it was how rare people said no to me. That was fascinating. As I was questioning myself and feeling bad about myself and not fitting in, I'd go on an audition and I'd make the casting director laugh, or I'd get this job and I'd be in a commercial and everyone would be like, oh my God, you're so good. And that was a validation that saved me through my childhood. I just found out my wife is pregnant, and what was my reaction? I did every drug I could find. I'll stop when I'm 30. This is just a thing I do in my 20s. When I get married, I'll stop partying like this. Then it became, or I'll just do it on the weekends, not during the week. Whatever the thing that we do, and it never, ever, ever, ever worked. I knew exactly how much I could drink before I got sloppy. I knew when I would need to call the Coke dealer, how much Ambien or benzos to take based on how much Coke I had so I would come down but hopefully not die.
I mean, we're like doctors, basically.
I basically went to med school. There is something about that pain being a weird gift. You were meant to experience pain. Life is not without pain. Let's deal with it. Let's actually feel it. So feel it.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. Can I just say, the boys, we have 2 boys, and their nanny is obsessed with you.
No way.
Huge fan.
Aw.
Huge fan. Had actually sort of mentioned you in the past and this podcast and how much she enjoyed it. I think there was something specific that she had heard and brought up with me, and I said, who said that? And she was telling me about you, and then fast forward, I mean, that was a few years ago. How long have you been doing this podcast?
6 years.
Yeah, so it was a few years back, and then one of our calendars is shared with her, and I put it in the calendar, and within seconds, she was like down in the kitchen. Within seconds, I hear her like, "You're doing Arielle's podcast?" Yeah, she was very excited.
That's
so
so
she was
sweet.
telling me so much. She was telling me everything, giving me your whole story this morning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Her name is...
Shout out. Sounds like a day one. We appreciate those day ones.
Yes.
That's so nice.
She's been a fan for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I love to talk to other sober people, especially people who don't seem to fit the stigma of what I think a lot of people think of when they think of addicts, alcoholics. That's certainly something that I have made part of my mission, because when I got sober at 28, there weren't really any people that I felt represented me, that had lives that were inspiring to me. Like, it was just different back then. There wasn't social media. People weren't really talking about it as much. There are obviously places that you can go, sober fellowships and things like that, but I didn't know about that. And so for me at 28, getting sober felt like the absolute worst thing that could ever possibly happen, and that I was going to be like the biggest loser. I didn't know that you could be sober and have a big, cool life. And so I love talking to other people who have had big, cool lives and they're sober and they talk about it. And, I love listening to you in interviews because you're just so forthcoming and candid about everything. And I think that you've had such an interesting experience, obviously, in your life. So yeah, so I'm really excited to talk to you. I would love to rewind a little bit and hear about like young Jason, because I'm sure
really cute.
I'm sure he was really cute,
yeah.
And I'm sure you've thought about it a lot, as I have, right? Trying to like piece together how the fuck did this happen? Yeah. Did you have addiction in your family or anything?
I see the traits amongst family members. Let's put it that way. There wasn't anyone that. It wasn't obvious. No one, was in recovery. No one was, in any sort of program or did it really affect their lives in a sort of negative way? Like it was, but in hindsight, especially, I can see that there are certain family members who have that thing, who have some isms, not necessarily with booze and drugs, but other things as well, where you go, oh, okay, all right, there's that thing in your brain that I have as well. And it manifests differently maybe, but, and to a different extent, they've managed to get through their lives in a different way. I needed to rid myself of this in order to move forward, but Yeah. So not an obvious, connection to anyone in my family, but there are certainly some similarities that I've noticed over the years.
I was smiling because I had this conversation with somebody like 2 days ago where I'm like, I see the isms, like the exact same thing, because I don't have any, alcoholics or addicts or anything like that in my family. I was the only one. But the more time that I have sober, and I think the older I get and the more perspective I have been able to recognize the same thing. And I'm like, oh, they have that thing, they're just not drinking or using.
This is exactly it. You can connect the dots. Yeah. I mean, whether it's food stuff or, it's just the general impulsivity and just things that pop up that you go, oh, I recognize that. And that's something that I have worked on in my recovery. So it's not like, there are these sort of perfect people that don't have any of these markers at all. But when I first came into the program and I first tried to get sober, I certainly was like, oh, where is this coming from? It's just my own sort of thing. But yeah, I can connect it to some people for sure.
So when you were young, I mean, did you feel like you had any of that like maladjustment to life? Was there anything prior to when you eventually started drinking and doing drugs that was an indication that was maybe the direction that you were going in?
That's a really good question. Not that I was aware of, certainly. Like I think one of the bigger things for me was I grew up, despite the connections that I've since seen, I grew up in a household that was very strict when it came to alcohol and drugs. And actually, this is, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that I have a grandparent who was an alcoholic, who I never met. And so it wasn't too far, outside of our house. He had just been gone a long time. But genetically speaking, it wasn't that far away, I guess. But because of that and some other reasons, I think my mom had a lot of trauma in her life and has a tendency, understandably, to catastrophize things quite a bit. And so there was always a real, strictness when it came to drinking or certainly drugs. And so as I grew up, there was this, it was the big bad thing. There wasn't, and it was very black and white. There was no room for sort of having a normal relationship with it, according to, my parents anyway. It was, if you drank a beer, you were going to wrap your car around a tree.
Mm-hmm.
It was very quick. It wasn't,
very extreme.
It was very extreme.
Yeah.
And I understand now why she had a tendency to do that, but it was very strict. And so I was very much a late bloomer when it came to that. I was really afraid. And I would go so far as to say too, that, it's that kind of strictness as well that, I felt an urge to rebel as well, and I think I've talked to my mom about this. But, and I find myself now with my kids, my wife, who's spoken publicly about food stuff in particular. So she's had battled that her whole life. But it's this tricky thing where, you want to implement, boundaries and safe habits and an understanding of what can happen when you either consume bad things or, you have to be careful not to make it this thing.
Forbidden fruit.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And we even see it sometimes with sugar with them now. But yeah, I think there was an element of that for me where it was so sort of, extreme that in a way it made me more curious, and I also had issues with my parents, we got into it quite a bit. And so I had a sense that as soon as I had my independence, I was going to do all the things that they said I couldn't do. And that certainly included, drinking and drugging. And I ended up trying it before I ever left the house. So, but compared to my friends, I was late. It was probably later in high school, maybe even like my senior year going into college was when I first got drunk, for sure. And then I don't know, weed might have even been after that. So I was kind of late to the game, but yeah, there was certainly some of that rebellion in it for me.
Well, let me ask you, do you remember your first drink? Like, do you remember the feeling that you had? Was it like a spiritual, profound experience for you? Or were you just kind of like doing what your friends were doing? Like, I feel like for myself, when I reflect back on my journey, outwardly, it looked like I had everything together. I was social. I had a lot of friends. I was smart. I played sports. I did extracurriculars. Like, on the outside, everything looked good. On the inside, restless, irritable, and discontent, right? I didn't have the language for it then. I felt really uncomfortable, but I didn't know that I felt uncomfortable. I just felt a little bit off. I felt like I couldn't fully connect with everybody in the way that I felt others could connect with each other. I felt like I was a little bit off in that way. And so when I had that first drink, it was like, the most profound thing in my life up to that point, because I was like, I hadn't realized how uncomfortable I was until I felt comfort and ease at once. And that was it. It was off to the races because I had found the solution to everything that had plagued me up until that point in my life in this one thing. So I wasn't sure if that was your experience or if you were like, you started drinking and then we'll obviously talk about your fame. I didn't know if that influenced things, or if you had that experience where like you had that first drink and it was like, oh yeah, this is like the missing piece.
It was incredible. The first time I got buzzed, for sure. It was. But
it has to be for everybody, right? Probably not even
alcoholics. Yeah, I'm sure. I remember. I don't remember my first drink exactly, but there's like two instances I remember, and one of them was probably the first, but there were two very, very early instances, and one was drinking Everclear, which of course is,
I had some crazy
proof.
Nights with
Yep.
Everclear.
My move was Everclear, Sprite, pink lemonade Crystal Light mix. Yeah, I think that was the trio.
I got tricked a few times with just the Everclear and the pink lemonade mix.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
In college.
Yep.
Where they were like making it seem like it was a mixed drink. Not
at all.
No.
No. Everclear is no joke.
No.
But yeah, and then there was another evening that I remember taking a bottle of Johnny Walker Red from our liquor cabinet in our house. My dad would like get bottles of liquor from work or something at the holidays, but they didn't drink because you would die. But they kept them. They kind of stashed them away in case people over the holidays or something came over and wanted something. So I knew it was safe to take it because they would never ever notice. So I remember that night as well, and I remember driving too. I remember like having it under the seat of my driver's seat in the car and taking it out and then taking big swigs of it. And so both of those times were one of those was probably my first drunk, but I remember the warmth of it. Like there was a physical warmth, like that felt good to me. People talk about that, like that alcohol bite and that.
You feel it in your veins. Your veins get warm.
Yeah, for me, it was fantastic. Mm-hmm. It was like the hand of God on me. It was just like I was blessed immediately, and then the drunk itself was also great. Yeah, for me, the thing I grew up. I started acting when I was a kid, and so I was like 5 years old when I started, and here in the city, in New York, but we grew up in North Jersey, a couple miles from here, but so close but so far away, that kind of thing. And so I was living this sort of like dual life where I was a professional actor in New York City and working with mostly adults, very adult world. I was very mature. I was, getting paid, all the sort of markings of an adult successful life. But then I was a kid in small town Jersey, going to school, trying to do sports, trying to fit in, trying to make friends. And so it was very, I don't know, it was hard to feel settled in any sort of way. And my household was, like I said, I had some issues with my parents, and, a sort of nice, safe word to use, I think, is that it was all very operatic. We're Italian. Things were always very loud. Everything was at an 11. There wasn't, and there was a lot of that, a lot of yelling, a lot of fighting. And so there was all of that sort of happening, and me sort of wrestling with who am I? What any kid, of course, is trying to do. But I had these additional sort of things where I would feel comfortable as the actor, but then uncomfortable as the kid, or I would finally make friends and be comfortable as the kid, but then I, felt left out. I wasn't getting jobs as an actor. It was all very strange, and I was very sort of. Yeah, it's a weird role to have as a kid actor, because not only are you for work, essentially an adult in a lot of ways, but then it's sort of translated to home too. My parents, I don't know, I got into sort of a bit of a parental role at times accidentally. They weren't doing it on purpose either, but just, the dynamic sort of happened because of the situation, and that's uncomfortable. That still kind of happens, and it's uncomfortable at times. It's hard, but I had so many snakes in my head. I remember and I had really, really bad OCD, like debilitating OCD. Oh my gosh! So all kinds. I had like moral OCD, and I had germs OCD. I had, counting and numbers and all things like that. I had a religious thing that happened for a while. My parents, who are not very religious, but there was a fear of God that they're Catholic, and there's, God is to be feared. He's not your friend. He's gonna, He's going to punish you. God punishes. I mean, literally, like we'd bang our knee on a table and be like, because I was running around the house, right? And I'd be running around and not listening to stop running. And then I bang my knee and I start crying. And it was like, well, God punishes. Like that's the sort of God that I grew up with.
Which you probably had to reconcile later.
I sure did.
We'll probably get there.
Sure did.
Yeah.
So one of the most intense, I think, battles I had with my OCD for a period was I would go to bed at night and a number would pop into my head, and whatever number popped into my head first, it could be 8 or it could be 47. That would be the number of Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and active contritions that I would have to say before I could fall asleep, or something horrible would happen to my parents, to me, to my sister, because God would want that to be the case. And so, and if I messed up, I would start doing it. If I messed up at any point, I would have to go all the way back to the beginning. And I would sit there for an hour, 2 hours more, saying these prayers in my head. That was a stretch I remember that was really bad. But I had it bad for a long time. And interestingly, my parents also have OCD, but they didn't know what it was. We didn't have even a term for it back then. And I would sort of get in trouble for it. Like I would wash my hands till they were bloody. And, it wasn't, oh, you have something happening here. How can we help you? It was, would you stop? You're bleeding you got blood on your sheets. Like what, it was that kind of, but they didn't know, like, anyway, I had I wanted to quiet the noises. I knew that for me, if there was something given to me where it would quiet the noises in my head in any way, shape, or form, or it would make me feel like I fit into a certain place, because I just never felt like I was, in somewhere. I would take it. I knew for sure I would take it, like without a doubt. And so I started, as I got a little older, started hearing stories about people getting drunk and how it, to me, it all sounded great.
Yeah.
Even the war stories of throwing up. Oh, I threw up. But then they're telling the story and they're laughing about it.
Sounds fun.
So I'm like, this sounds great.
Yeah.
And so the first time I got drunk, I remember the snakes in my head chilled out. Like, I remember things quieted down.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember loving that.
It just sounds like a perfect storm. And I think that everybody who has been through it or who's going through it could probably relate to that. And, I think that a big misconception about alcoholics or addicts is that, there's all these childhood events, adverse childhood events and traumas, and that can definitely be the case. But sometimes not, sometimes it is this internal storm. And like with you, it sounds like you didn't really have like solid footing, because you had one foot in one life and another foot in another life. And like at that age, you should be, kind of solidifying this identity, and you had different identities and you're wearing a lot of different hats. And so it's like very destabilizing, it sounds like.
It was very destabilizing.
And then you have the OCD thing going on, and it's just a perfect storm. And none of that stuff makes someone an alcoholic, I don't think. I look at mine, and I had like this tumultuous relationship, and I had the discomfort, and I had the like just hyper self-awareness that was so suffocating. And then I had, the stuff at home that was mostly of my doing, like all of these things. And that was my storm. And that didn't make me an alcoholic, but it made me ripe for needing something outside of myself to regulate what was happening.
You were so susceptible.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that was it for me too. I definitely, and I was hyper self-aware too, which is obviously a great thing in so many ways, but it can get very loud, and you can get overly critical, and you can.
So how does that work with the career choice that you?
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. It's wild. It's like it's hard. I can be my own, worst enemy in so many ways. Mm-hmm. Most alcoholics can be.
Yeah, true.
Are.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's funny. Like the career, it wasn't really a choice, actually. I mean, it is a choice, but I kind of fell into it as a kid, because you care about this story. But basically, my older sister was a dancer. She was in this dance group in New Jersey, and they were really good, and they would travel around. And we, like I said, we grew up just outside the city, and so a lot of the moms started taking their kids into the city to try to get agents and managers. And my sister wanted to do it. My parents thought, hey, you know what? If she works, it'd be a good way to save money for college. Fast forward a couple of years, and the manager, my sister started working. The manager asked if I wanted to do it, and I took to it right away. I loved it, and despite it, still to this day, to some extent, creating identity issues for myself and being destabilizing, it also gave me a validation that made me, that was really helpful as I was questioning myself and feeling bad about myself and not fitting in. I'd be in Jersey and go to school, and it'd be hard making friends, but I'd go on an audition and I'd make the casting director laugh, or I'd get this job and I'd be in a commercial and everyone would be like, oh my God, you're so good. And they'd tell my mom, your son's so good. And that was a validation that, in a lot of ways saved me through my childhood, saved it from being, I think, even worse than it could have been, but led to some other issues, So it's I don't know what I'm answering here, but yeah.
Well, the hyper self-awareness and being an actor and watching yourself, presumably, and then having all of these other people watch you
and judge you.
I would just, I think like I would never be able to.
It's really,
I would just die.
Yeah. I'm lucky in that I've achieved a certain amount of success that I can, has given me a certain confidence, of course. Sometimes at the same time, incredibly confident in my abilities, and yet super, doubtful and critical and having self-esteem issues. It's really crazy. Part of that is just because the industry itself is so incredibly fickle. So while you might feel like you're good and you did the right thing and you're talented enough to get X, Y, or Z role, you don't get it and you get rejected and it throws you off again and you start questioning things. Or I have. And so no matter how much confidence I will bring to a certain, performance or role or audition or meeting or whatever it is, I wish I could guard it better and protect it more. But there's weaknesses in it too. It can be, you can poke holes in it rather quickly. And this is after 42 years of doing this. Like, it's still hard to get rejected, It's, I've probably learned how to deal with it better than a lot of people just because I've had to deal with so much of it. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt any less each time it happens. I have tools now, particularly in sobriety and through my program, that I can, exactly. And I can sort of get myself out of that hurt quicker than maybe some other people could, but it still fucking stings, but especially in look, and it used to be so much easier when I could drink.
Yeah.
It was, I got this, this is great,
Yeah. So you had this inner turmoil. You had all these things going on. You had, one foot in one place, another foot in the other. You had the OCD. You had the maybe religious trauma kind of stuff happening, the things at home. And then you become a household name in your early 20s. Is that right?
21.
21.
American Pie came out.
I mean, that's a baby, first of all.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? Because I think that fame, especially on that level, is such an unnatural thing for anybody to experience. I'm sure part of it was amazing, right? But can you tell us about that? And then where was the drinking and everything at that time?
First, I'll say, yes, it was amazing in so many ways.
And it was pre-social media, right?
Yeah.
Pre-phones, that
Yep.
was kind of the golden age, I would think.
Yeah, and it was also, an era where fame wasn't as easily attainable as it is now, because of phones, because of the internet. There's, influencers. I mean, my kids, we'll talk about someone. I'll be like, who are you talking about?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I love this guy.
Your nanny.
Yeah, exactly. Stop. But I'll be like, who? And then I'll check Instagram or something, and it's 12 million followers. I'm like, I'm sorry, who is this? I have no idea what's happening. And also now there's despite maybe some of these people having massive followings, it's still very divided. It's I have no idea who my son's YouTube guy was that he just mentioned. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. When this happened, American Pie, everyone saw it. It was, and if you didn't see the movie, you watched my appearance on Leno. And if you didn't watch Leno, you read a newspaper article with me.
It was a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, it was in the zeitgeist in a very big way at a certain time. And everyone knew about it. And so I will say, though, being a kid actor, I was more prepared, I think, than most people. I certainly did not have that kind of fame until American Pie came out, but there were flirtations with some, little bit of fame. I did a TV series in 1991 that, was a national TV. It went one season and it was canceled, but it was enough to where I'd get recognized occasionally, at the mall. Some kid might come up to me and be like, are you the, but it was enough to make me go, oh, well, this is, even to just experience it in to a much lesser degree, but even to just see that there is something very specific that happens when you are recognized for being in film or television, it's fascinating. But I also was, I think, more prepared than most, not because I had even gotten a taste of what fame might be like, but because I had seen the ups and downs of the industry and had been rejected so much, and had, even after I did that TV series that I thought was going to be my big break and it was going to be the thing, I went back to not working for a while, and there were a whole slew of parts that I did not get, and I was rejected. And then I did a Broadway play, and it was incredible, and it ran for a year, and amazing, a kid on Broadway, but then I didn't work for another year after that. And so I learned a long time ago that the success you can get some success, but it could very quickly go away. In my industry especially, that the industry is fickle, and I think that prepared me. So when American Pie hit, even though it certainly felt different than every other job I had done in the past, like there was no getting around that this thing was going to change my life. Even before it came out, there were things that were starting to happen that you go, oh my God, this is going to be life-changing. But there still in the back of my mind was a sense of it could all go away. It could all go away at any point, or it could change, or it could, it's not always going to be like this. And it hasn't been. It hasn't been. And so while the times when it hasn't been are still incredibly hard, it didn't prepare me to deal with those times as much, because I've been sort of down and felt like, oh my God, am I ever going to work again? That still happens. It more prepared me for when I get the successes. So when I'm on top of the world, American Pie, and then, Orange is the New Black was another thing. And, I've had some moments that have been fantastic, but I've always had a sense of appreciate this, because it could go away. So, okay, that being said.
Nothing lasts forever, the good and the bad.
Exactly.
It's such an important thing to remember.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That being said, it was crazy how sort of life-changing it was and how quickly it happened. And I enjoyed it for sure. Both because, the rewards and the sort of personally and professionally, the perks that came with it all. I had been working at that point for, professionally for 15 plus years. And like I said, had gotten some good jobs, and they had gone away. And, and so for me professionally, a lot of offers came in after that. And my career really started in earnest, 15 years in the making. And so that was incredible. And I loved that and felt like I was a hard worker and showed up and wanted to take advantage of that. But I also took advantage of the other shit too. And, I had money, and I had my independence. I was living out in LA, which I had come out for a job. Actually, speaking of oh, this is it. And then it wasn't. I had come out a year before American Pie for a TV series. And that was the thing that got me out of my parents' house. And I was finally living on my own, doing the show, and that was canceled. But at that point, I said, I'm staying out in LA, test the waters, see what happens, and American Pie happened. So, but, I had my independence and was making some friends, like-minded friends, of course, who, indulged in the same things I wanted to indulge in, who introduced me to the things that I wanted to be introduced to.
Lower companions.
Uh-huh.
I love that saying, lower companions, though. I'm like, I'm the lower companion too. Like, we're all in this together.
Yep. And so I was, like you said earlier, I was off to the races.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing about fame that I learned very quickly was that a lot of people, most people, don't say no. Like, it was how rare people said no to me. That was fascinating. and still happens to an extent, simply because I am famous. And it's wild, and it works to my advantage sometimes, but, and it did then, but it also worked against me. There weren't many boundaries. There wasn't much guidance. I didn't have anyone, my parents were back here and, didn't have much older influence in my life. If I did, it was people I'd work with on a movie, but then I'd work with them for 2 months and then go back to my, being 22 with money in the bank and Coke in my pocket and no one saying no to me, and
sounds amazing.
It was,
yeah.
And it was,
yeah.
But I was also aware of how crazy that was.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated with fame, the psychology of it for myself, like how it makes me feel, but also what it does to other people around me who experience me and my fame. And I mean regular people, like inner circle people, but also people who just recognize me in fan interactions. Yeah, it's fascinating. And no two interactions are the same, but there's categories for sure, and I've experienced all of them. But it really is wild. But yeah, so the fame happens, and now, while I enjoyed it and it was fun and it gave me all these wonderful things, it also was stressful too. It was weird to always feel like eyeballs were on you. It was stressful to think, is my next movie going to be as big as American Pie? So with it came, more snakes as well. And the drugs were wonderful at quieting those snakes in my head.
I think it's fascinating too. I'm fascinated by fame because I think that so many people think that they want to be famous and they probably don't realize what it's actually like. And I would imagine that feeling of feeling like there's always eyeballs on you, especially when you are hyper self-aware, would feel kind of suffocating. I don't know. I mean, I could see the good and the bad, especially at that age, where it sounds like things were kind of still fun, or maybe fun with problems. And so it was probably fun having people around that didn't say no to you and having, those external validations, but then also maybe a little bit suffocating, feeling like, well, God, I can't walk outside and not feel like I'm being watched. Like, it's just this interesting kind of dichotomy.
Totally. Yeah. It's and that is something I still wrestle with, is the feeling of, people watching, because I'm not, look, there are obviously levels of fame. And, when American Pie came out, there was a certain level that I was thrust up into, but there are people that are way more famous than me, obviously. And I've managed to sort of settle into this sort of level of fame, I think, where it's a real cross-section of people who will recognize me, which is to say any demographic at this point, I think I'm not surprised if younger people recognize me, and I'm certainly not surprised if people my age, and not surprised if older people recognize me. And it's a large percentage of people, I would say, who have seen at least American Pie and, might have some sort of like, even a look towards me, I can manage that depending on where I go and, where my eyes are, keeping my head down, wearing a hat, or glasses. It's funny. I have gotten recognized a bunch wearing a hat and sunglasses, and people have, and a bunch of times people have said to me, I know you're trying to be incognito, but I'm recognizing you.
It almost draws more attention to you.
Well, it's not that. It's not about sort of making myself look different so you don't recognize me. It's about helping me not see you recognize
Got
me.
it. Yeah.
Like it's a safety blanket almost. Like it's a security blanket rather. It feels like I can put my head down and actually it does help. Like I can, if I see like a large group of people, on the sidewalk, whatever, I can put my head down and actually no eye contact and I can move past you and probably not be recognized. But more, it's about how it makes me feel. I feel safer with it sometimes. So, but I'm not being followed or mobbed like that. That doesn't happen. But there is just a feeling of, and it depends on what mood I'm in. Like I might have just gotten into a thing with my wife, or, I'm feeling bad about something that just happened, or I'm stressing about my kids, or I'm, whatever it is. And I'm having all of these feelings inside, and I'm out, let's say, and if I feel like eyeballs are on me, I feel very vulnerable. I mean, they don't know that I'm having these feelings. I don't look any different than if I had those feelings or if I didn't, but I'm feeling exposed in a way that can be uncomfortable.
I'm not famous at all.
Well, that's not true, actually.
However, with internet fame, I'm putting that in quotes, I understand that on like a teeny tiny scale, especially when I'm in New York, because you're out walking around. I always run into people who follow me, and it's mostly great. But sometimes there have been times where I remember one time when I was still with my ex and I was in the apartment and I was sick and I was crying about something because we had had an argument and he was in LA, and I was like, I got to go get like soup or something. I don't know. And I was like, I know I'm going to see somebody. I just knew it. And I walk outside and I'm like on Waverly Crossing, and this sweet girl, if she's listening, like it was great, whatever, but ran up and was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed. Da, da, da. Can we take the picture? And the pictures are out. And I'm just like, it's hard to feel like you need to be on when you're not in the mode to be on. And just that feeling of like, if you walk by and you know when somebody recognizes you. So I know that feeling of just wanting to like, on a teeny, everyone relax. I don't think I'm on Jason's level, but like that feeling, when I've experienced it, I'm like, God, I don't know how actual celebrities deal with this on like a daily basis. And when it's on the level of every time you leave your house, you know it's going to happen. That's not my experience. I can go, be anonymous. But people who are so recognizable, it's like, I don't know, it changes everything, like in such a nuanced way where you have to be really aware of your surroundings and how you're. And then when you do interact with someone, you want to give them the good experience, right?
Yep.
It's like, and that's hard to do sometimes when you're going through some shit, and
it's exactly
tricky.
Right. And also depending on who you're with. I mean, I have kids now.
Yeah.
Do you have kids?
No.
I want to protect them as best I can as well. There can be inappropriate times, I feel like, when people might, but it's also it's tiring even. I find that it's like it can kind of be exhausting just thinking about, is this a place to go? Like I'm always sort of, and I'm probably overthinking it, I'm sure I am. That's not surprising at all for people like us, but it's, I like, it can be exhausting. Like the mental gymnastics I do, thinking about, is this person recognizing me? Should I not go out here? Do I, but like, it does change. Not, again, I'm at a certain level. I'm not, I can live a fairly normal life, particularly here in New York.
I feel like in New York, though, people just don't pay as much attention. I don't know. There's like a level of anonymity, which is kind of nice.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I also find, though, that people tend to be a little, what's the word? Just cooler about it for the most part. I mean, tourists are different, right? So, but I, don't go to Times Square, or I just
you don't. You don't just go do a lap when you need a little boost.
God, it's so funny. Like we'll drive through Times Square sometimes because whatever the Uber needs to go. We were somewhere uptown, and he takes 7th Avenue down for some silly reason or whatever it is. And, I'm like, oh my God, like, look at this place. I haven't been here in months or years. And it's like, but yeah, I avoid that, of course, at all costs. But just as far as numbers go, I'm sure I'm recognized here a lot more than I was in LA because I interact with more
the
people
entire time. Yeah.
You're in your car the whole time. That's exactly right. And I had tinted dark blackout, windows. And
very easy to isolate in LA. Less so in
Arielle,
New York.
That is, I literally say that to everyone. And the worst of it, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but like the worst of my drinking and using was my final years in LA.
Yeah, I want to hear about like what was the catalyst to getting sober.
Yeah. I moved out to LA in 97 for this TV show that was canceled. Then American Pie happened and, things got real busy. Life got big and fun. And so was mostly out in LA, came back here a little bit. And then of course locations wherever I was filming. But LA was kind of my home base, not kind of, it was my home base. And I had a good relationship with it at first, really good. I loved it. And then it kind of just became sort of like whatever. And I was really, I don't know. I was partying so much and it was all kind of a blur, I think. It was like a blur of sets and partying. But at a certain point, I think I was like, is this really where I want to be? Like if I get married or have kids, like is this, I'm from the East Coast. So it felt to me a little, I don't know, hard. Yeah, to imagine myself sort of being there for the rest of my life. But meanwhile, 15 years had passed and I was still there. So I'm like, well, but it is. And that people do live here, obviously. And maybe this is what happens. Then I met my wife there. And so again, it was okay. And when I met my wife, and I've talked about this before and obviously with her, but we met and fell in love, but we were both still very independent, like had our own, she was trying to figure out her career and I was still on my path, but I was also using all the time, much more than she knew. And so I had a couple years there where even though I had sort of gotten married and ostensibly was maturing and becoming this adult, I was still just, blocking everything out with drugs and alcohol. Just, everything was still kind of a blur. And it just sort of got worse and worse. And I started to question myself and if I had a problem a lot more than, I remember early, like in 2000. So I was like, maybe I was 22 even, and I was in Vancouver to shoot a movie. And the first thing I did, was go to a liquor store. I remember being so like blown away because in Canada, they had these liquor stores where you had like a cart, like an actual shopping cart, and you can load it up. And I was like, this is amazing. Because where I grew up, I don't know, and I feel like New York too. There's liquor stores, but I don't know, just they're small.
You get a
New
basket.
York, you get a basket,
yeah,
or you buy one bottle and then you'll come back when it's done. And but I was in this mega store with shopping carts for booze, and I was like, this is incredible. And so I got a whole bunch of shit and stocked up this apartment that I was staying in, and started drinking by myself. And I probably had already, but there was something, I remember being aware of it, thinking, I'm coming home after set and I'm pouring myself a scotch and I'm sitting here and I'm watching TV and I'm just kind of drinking by myself. And I was aware of it and thought, is this normal? I don't know. But then I quickly fell back into the romance of it. And yeah, it is normal. I come home after a long day of work and have 2 fingers of scotch and just sit down and, read the paper, and it just, yeah. But when fast forward, to after I was married in those couple of years, and I was really drinking a lot by myself and using a lot by myself and not telling my wife and isolating a ton. And yeah, and I took advantage of her. She's Jenny, can be a little more abstract, and I can sort of, or at least I felt like I was able to sort of, put things past her. And I did. And I would, she would go to sleep and I would go into my TV room and where I had a bar and I would drink from the bottle. At this point, I wasn't pouring glasses. I was just drinking from the bottle, and I was doing Coke by myself until all hours of the morning. And things started to, and also my career was in a weird sort of spot, and I was having doubts and concerns and, and real sort of, identity issues, and things got very lonely. And so, I would, can be a very isolating place, Los Angeles. And, I had this wonderful house up in the hills, but, you drive to your whatever meeting, if you had a meeting or whatever I would have during the day, you drive in an hour of traffic by yourself to wherever you were going. You'd interact with a human for a little bit, and then you get back in your car and drive an hour and a half by yourself in traffic. And then you'd get to this beautiful house in the hills, and you wouldn't want to go anywhere now. Like, friends might call and be like, hey, dinner. And you're like, that, dude, I'm not going anywhere.
This is my life right now, by the way.
Is it?
I just bought a house in the hills a year ago after my divorce, but I felt that way when I was married as well, because we were in the Palisades. Palisades are beautiful, but it was like, okay, I would drive to podcast in West Hollywood. So I'm in the car by myself for an hour. Yep. And then I would drive home, and then I'm like in my bubble. So I'm not going to go back over to the other side of town to go to dinner.
No, of course not.
No,
of course not.
Very isolating, especially every bubble of LA is different, but I really, really pushed myself to have a fellowship in and outside of recovery.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's too isolating. And I'm from the East Coast too, but all my family is New York, Connecticut, around here. I have a lot of friends in the city. And when I got divorced, I was like, I am going to move to the city and pack up. And I was done with LA. And that was the plan. And then I met somebody.
In LA.
Yeah. I need to have your wife maybe talk to him, because I need to hear how you got her to move out of LA.
Yeah, well, we have there's two different stories there.
Okay.
She has her story, then it involves being postpartum and finding out that our house was haunted, seeing a door move and being convinced that our house was haunted. And, and that's what got her to commit.
Okay, so I don't think that's going to work on him.
We had a place here for a few years, and we were kind of doing the bi-coastal thing, which is very cool. But then you have a kid, and it's like, this isn't practical. This is insane. And I came back for a job, and we were here for a few months, and she was at that point convinced that the house was haunted. And so we had bought this house. It was a newer house. We had bought it, for us newer. We had only had it for under a year. And she was like, maybe, you know what? I think I can stay here. And before she had a chance to change her mind, she hadn't even finished the sentence. And I was on the phone with our real estate agent in LA, sell the house. But yeah, I did know at that point towards, I had first tried to get sober in LA. And like we were talking about earlier, there's great sobriety in LA, and I did meet some great people, other actors as well, which was really helpful for me to meet people, like-minded people, career-wise and everything. But yeah, it couldn't click, and I would find myself alone and isolating, and I would find myself breaking whatever sobriety I had. It was incredibly fragile, obviously, in those early days, and I think one of the great ironies of sobriety for me has been I spent the last few years of my drinking, telling myself that I had a problem. And then the first few years of my sobriety, telling myself that I didn't have a problem. I'm fine. I'm not I don't need this. I'm okay. And I would keep going out. And so, but yeah, it was LA for me was at that time, it was really, despite having fallen in with some great people in sobriety, it still felt very, it was precarious. And my relationship with Los Angeles had soured at that point, and I wanted everything felt, I was constantly reminded of, work that I didn't get. You know,
Yeah.
you drive down
Drive down
Sunset
Sunset,
Boulevard,
I'm
and it's like,
sure.
for your consideration. And you're like, I auditioned for that. Oh, fuck. But it is, you know, it's a doctor living in the hospital. Like
Yeah.
you can't escape it. And
Yeah.
I just felt like it was, and also, you know, the currency in LA is fame, and my relationship with fame is, you know, is interesting. And I felt very like, it's just having identity stuff, and it just made my drinking worse and worse. And I couldn't hang on to, I couldn't like really get my claws in to sobriety. It just wasn't happening. And so when, you know, Jenny sort of gave me that opening for New York, in the back of my mind, I really thought that it would be a healthier place for me, which is also ironic because, you know, New York City, of course, known for partying, known for the late nights and all this. When I would tell people, no, actually, New York has been great it's helped me compared to LA for my sobriety. They're like, what? I mean, I did most of my partying in New York. I'm like, me too. I did a lot of partying here, but there is something about, you know, interacting with other humans, you know, even if sometimes the fame stuff and the anonymity can be a little stressful or whatever that is, there is something about the energy of New York that gives me something that, you know, fills me in a way that Los Angeles couldn't. And, you know, I'd like to think that it would have clicked for me in LA too. I just wasn't ready to do it at that time. But I do believe that coming to New York helped me. And so I had my final, I did fall off the wagon here, but that was, you know, 7.5 years ago, and it's been going well. Yeah, I just like having that. I feel like there's medicine all around me here.
I understand. I can relate
a walk,
so much to what you're saying.
Even a
Yeah.
walk. You know what I mean? Even not the human component of a walk, but just to be able to leave my house and go on a walk.
And see people.
Go to the river.
Yeah.
You know, we live on the west side, and it's just like, go see water.
Yeah.
There is something, that for me, it really has had an impact on my sobriety. I really believe that. Or walking and just, you know, just looking at my watch and going, oh, there's a meeting. I know there's a meeting nearby and it starts in 10 minutes. I'm just going to pop into it. Like in LA, you had to plan, like you're driving, you had to plan what meetings. It's just, it takes more effort, and I can be more casually, bad word probably for it, but more casually sober here in a way that feels,
no, I get that.
better for
You have
me.
to be very intentional in LA,
LA,
and
yeah.
that can be problematic because I know for myself, something I'm working on is I will say I'm going to do something and really want to do it. Like there's a 10:30 Tuesday, like perfect. That's great. I am going to do that, and I'm going to feel so good, and it's going to be amazing. And then Tuesday happens, and then I'm like, you know, the meetings, and then it's 10:15 and I can't get in my car, and I'm not going to make it. You know, it's like I have the best intentions, and it just doesn't happen. Whereas you're right, it's
And
different here.
Then you get on yourself for it.
Yeah, and then I'm like,
You
oh,
beat yourself
God,
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm moving to New York, basically.
Come, we want you back, please.
Oh God, I
Come
would
back.
love it.
We'll
I
hit
would.
some meetings together. Yeah.
Do you what advice do you have? Because whenever I do an episode on sobriety, I always get similar questions, and they are around like, how do you know that you have a problem? And I think a lot of people right now are kind of sober curious, and wherever they are on the spectrum, it's definitely way more in the zeitgeist than it was
For
years
sure.
ago. For whatever reason, you know, some
Yeah.
people are doing it just because they want to be more health conscious.
Mhm.
Before it was like, yeah, a few glasses of wine is great for your health. Now it's like, no, it's toxic. Like it's killing your brain cells. You know, it's like
Poison. Yeah.
yeah. And then I
Mhm.
think also people are just coming to grips more with their own behaviors and realizing that they might not be serving them. But people always say like, well, how did you know you had a problem? I'm like, well, for me, this isn't snorting dust off the floor. It was probably,
Yep, sure.
probably an indication, you know,
Sure.
the seizures, like it was like very
Shit got real.
obvious.
Shit got real.
Yeah, it was not in that gray area
Yep.
at all.
Yep.
But it sounds like you lived there for a little bit.
I did. I mean,
so yeah.
yeah.
So what would you tell somebody if they asked you that?
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I lived in the gray area, but I have, snorting dust off the floor stories as well, or similar to that, like, yeah.
I mean, it really looks convincing sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I mean, one of my craziest stories that I shared recently was, like I was doing coke by myself in my house, and I did what I said was the last line. It's 4:00. I got to be done. My wife doesn't even know that I'm up doing coke. I gotta get to bed. I have something tomorrow. What am I doing? I gotta
the worst feeling.
The worst feeling.
Yeah.
The fucking worst feeling.
It makes me like sick to my stomach right now. Yeah.
The worst. And so I was like, what am I doing? And there was still some coke left in the bag, but I was like, I got to get rid of this coke. So what do? I go, I throw it in the trash. I think it started with like the trash in my house. Within 15 minutes, as soon as my last bump is wearing off, I'm like, what am I doing? And I go into my trash and I take it out and I do a line. And I'm like, I got to get rid of this. And so I went outside to like the trash bins, that you have in front of your house in LA. And I threw it in one of the trash bins. And I was like, okay, I'm done. And then I went upstairs and I'm sitting and and I'm like, all right, I'm going to take an Ambien now and I'll come down, and I was like, before I took the Ambien, I was like, you know what, one more. And I went outside and I climbed like into the trash bin and got the bag of Coke out and went upstairs and did another line. And I was like, what am I doing? This is absolutely insane. I literally got in my car with the bag of Coke, drove to like Sunset, the bottom of the hill, and there was a house like kind of closer to Sunset. And I put the bag of Coke in one of those trash bins, but not just in the trash bin. There was a Starbucks cup inside of it with still some coffee in it, and I put it in that. Closed that, drove back home. A couple minutes back up the hill, and I'm like, okay, I'm good. It wore off. I was like, I got to get that bag of Coke.
I mean,
and I literally drove down the hill, parked. Opened up this person's fucking trash bin, opened up the Starbucks container with coffee in it, pulled the wet coffee baggie out of the thing. It was still sealed, of course.
Right, so that was still dry.
Dried it off, drove back home and finished the bag
Had
of Coke.
you dumped it in the coffee, do you think you would have driven down and gotten the coffee and drank the coffee? Yeah.
That's a really good question.
I probably would have.
Probably.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that is really like, is so telling. I could have just easily opened the baggie and dumped it down the toilet.
Yeah. Yep.
But I didn't.
Yeah.
I did not open the baggie.
That's too final.
It's too final.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to finish that bag.
Yeah.
The moment I got it. But I kept playing this game with myself. Why? Like, why did I keep playing this game? And it's fascinating. It was fascinating.
Was that rock bottom?
That was very that was very close to rock bottom. That was very, very close to rock bottom. But there was a reason I told that story, because your question, what was your question before that?
How do you know if you have a problem? If
right, the gray
listening,
the gray area stuff.
So
right.
that would not be the gray area?
Not so gray. Not so gray. But I did spend a lot of time in what I would think is a gray area, despite those instances, of which there were plenty. But yeah, for me, it was the obsession over it, right? So for me, it was wake up and immediately think, how am I going to get my first sip, line, toke? How and when is this going to happen? What do I have today? Do I have a meeting that I need to go to? What time is that meeting? Oh, good, it's at 10. This is good. So I don't have to wait that long. When I'm done with the meeting at 10:45, I can come home and start drinking. It was just constantly obsessing about when the next drink was going to be, or drug, and how to pull it off. It was exhausting. And so I was sort of consumed mentally, even if on days that I was not having, Coke baggie and Starbucks cups in trash bins on Sunset Boulevard days, I was still just obsessing over it constantly. Yeah. And there's one of those
thought that outweighs all the other thoughts, right?
Yeah. And one of course, the many sort of sayings, in the program that when I first got into the program, and they're on the wall, like at Perry Street, they're on the wall, and you're like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But they're all amazing. As you kind of you go, oh my God, it's so spot on. But one that I do come back to a lot is, if the cure works, you might have the disease. And that, I think, is so great because that really helped me, actually, because there were those moments where when I first tried getting sober and I would question if I really needed it, I would come back to, well, when I am sober, is it working? Does it work for me? Is my life better? And you go, oh yeah, I guess so. And if you don't even want to say like, oh, I might have the disease, if the cure works, you might have the disease or the sickness, whatever. Even if you don't want to, if the cure works, you can just leave it there. If it works, if sobriety is working for you in your life, then shouldn't that be enough? Like, oh, so you didn't, get off in the basement. You got off on the 7th floor. You didn't, that was your bottom. Or if for you, it wasn't, you weren't totally consumed with it, but when you would drink, things would go south and, but other people do that too. So why is mine? But when you give it up, if you give it up and you find that things are actually a little better, then shouldn't that be enough?
If you can give it up.
If you can give it up.
That's the other thing. Yeah. That's usually what I tell people, it's like, okay, stop.
Right.
Try stopping.
And if you can't, that's a pretty good sign too.
But for me, like, there was something very insidious that would happen, which would be that, I would have these periods of sobriety where not maybe full sobriety, but where I would drink a glass of wine at night. And I was like, wow. I mean, probably other alcoholics don't notice, like, oh my gosh, like, or non-alcoholics don't notice that they only drink a glass of wine, but I could quote unquote control it.
Yeah, you could drink
for
normally.
Long periods of time. And I'm like, oh my God, I just needed the job. I just needed the right relationship. I just needed the right car. I just needed the right, whatever external situation, circumstantial thing. And that really fucked with me, because being an alcoholic was the one thing that I absolutely did not want to be true in the world. Yep. Anything else. I went to rehab so many times. I was like, yeah, it's not the alcohol, it's the boyfriend, love addict, or like, it's the Coke, it's not the alcohol, it's the pills, it's not the alcohol. Like, that was my solution to life. And so the prospect of giving that up was so terrifying. So those periods when I could control it was really, really a mindfuck. But then, of course, inevitably, like, I would pick up where I left off and then some. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there is like one way to know, but I think that those are good litmus tests.
Some indicators. Yes. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But you're right. I mean, the not being able to give it up, like, I played those games. When I'm 30, that feels like I'll stop when I'm 30. This is just a thing I do in my 20s. Or, when I get married. When I get married, I'll stop partying like this, Or, then it became on the weekends. I just won't drink, or I'll just do it on the weekends, not during the week. Whatever the thing that we do, and it never, ever, ever, ever worked. I would fail all of those tests that I made myself take, and fail them miserably. And and so my bottom wasn't long after that cocaine retrieval night, but it was my wife. She found out she was pregnant. This is actually one of those things where it's like, then it was if we have a kid, I'll stop doing this. We found out she was pregnant. I went on a 3-day bender, basically. Like, it was like Memorial Day weekend that we found out. And so had people over, champagne, I found some mushrooms that I had, everything, Adderall there was in the house. I just basically like spent the rest of that weekend, and on Tuesday morning sort of came to and was like, what am I doing? I just found out my wife is pregnant. Like, and what was my reaction? I did every drug I could find. Like, that's not sustainable. It can't be. It can't be. I don't want to be that. I at that point was like, I don't want to be this guy. And it really was exhausting. The obsession over it was really, it was really tired, and it was really stressful. But then 4 years of, okay, I'll try sobriety. And then I put 6 months together. I'm like, so I could do this. Okay, I could do this, and I can have a glass of wine, and we're on vacation or something, or we were in Italy, and it's like, well, how can I go to Italy and not drink some wine, And I won the first night. I was able to drink some wine and go to bed, and it was like, this is great. And the next night, I drank a glass of wine, but then was leaving the dinner table to go into the other room where the wine was, and I was chugging the wine from the bottle. Just like that.
Cunning, baffling, and powerful, right?
Really cunning.
But yeah, I always, if people are not sure about sobriety, and I'm not here to sell anybody on sobriety, but I think that people may have a misconception that it's a lot of work. I mean, there is work required, at least for me, to stay sober, but it's become a really intuitive kind of work, and it's so much easier than the mental gymnastics and the exhaustion of that obsession and the playing chemist every day, and just every decision revolving around when and where and how and why and if I was going to drink and how much and how, the aftermath and all of that. Like, it's so much easier. Sobriety to me is so much easier and so much better.
Freeing. Yeah, there is a freedom that comes with not having to do those things anymore. Like, the figuring it out was so the chemist. I love that, because I knew exactly how much I could drink before I got sloppy. I knew, where to hide, how to hide. I knew when I would need to call the Coke dealer. So this, because I was going to drink too much, and, how much Ambien to take or benzos to take based on how much Coke I had. So I would come down, but hopefully not die.
I mean, we're like doctors, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I basically am an MD. Yeah. I basically went to med school. Yeah. But it's exhausting.
Yes.
Exhausting. And then really, for me, the other thing, I think, when I knew that I hit bottom as well. And again, this is all around the same time, those last couple months in Los Angeles for me, or last year in LA for me, was the waking up next to my wife and rolling over and looking at her and saying good morning and figuring out what I did the night before based on her response back to me. So if she said good morning back to me, okay, whatever I did, I got away with it. Like, it was fine. It didn't involve her. I didn't fuck up. I can have another day where I can do the same. I'm clean. If she ignored me, or if she was like, good morning, or do you not know what you did? Like, then it was, oh my God, I have to put the pieces back here. First of all, I have to piece together my night. And then I have to fix whatever I fucked up before I went to bed or before I passed out, and I would countless mornings like that. I would wake up and have no idea how my night ended. And and if I woke up before her, then I'm just waiting for her to get up going, oh my God. Like, what, is she going to wake up and be pissed, or is she going to wake up and everything's fine?
I just had an epiphany, because I feel like something that I'm working on and that I struggle with is that I am a temperature taker. So I'm always reading, especially with, my romantic partners, reading their temperature and trying to take their temperature. And I think it's probably, I think some of it is childhood stuff, but also so many years of that exact scenario. Every day being like, oh, and having to take cues, looking for clues and taking people's temperature to figure out where I stood with them, because I didn't remember what happened
Yep.
before. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's
I will be
such
taking that to therapy.
that's a great connection. My gosh, yeah.
But I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the greatest gifts of sobriety that we can leave people with?
Yeah, well, the freedom, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like the freedom, a confidence that comes with it. You know, when I first got sober, I was so afraid I wasn't going to be funny anymore. I wasn't going to be able to be socially engaged with people anymore. I wasn't, you know, all my fears. I thought everything rode on me having a buzz or being up. And, you know, to learn that not only does it not, but actually I'm a better performer. I'm more confident, you know, it's a great thing. So I love the confidence that comes with that. And I think that's a real reward for me of sobriety. Being present, you know, I never wanted to be in the moment, because being in the moment was stressful or bad or traumatic or, you know, exhausting, whatever it was. And so drugs and alcohol allowed me to get out of that moment. And, but now I'm in those moments, and to be able to be present, particularly with my kids and my family. And by the way, I still struggle. I still find ways to isolate sometimes. I still am a dry drunk sometimes. It still happens, but I'm aware of it, and I have the tools to get out of it. But yeah, being present. And by the way, not just for the good things or the little things or the mundane things, but for the bad things. You know, the things where, you know, are so traumatic or bad or awful or sad, where you go, I need a drink, or I would totally be drinking, you know, where you have to sit and endure it. And it might be more painful in some ways, but it's you get on the other side of it and you go, oh my God, not only am I proud of myself for getting on the other side of it without drugs and alcohol, but there is something about that pain being a weird gift, you know, of sorts. Like we're meant to experience pain. Life is not without pain, you know, let's deal with it. Like, let's actually feel it. I hope you don't feel it that much. I don't want to feel it that much, but we're going to feel it.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. It is an inevitability, right? So feel it.
Life on life's terms.
Life on life's terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
It really is. And there's so many things that I'm, you know, I've calmed my ego down, you know, and I'm able to recognize when I'm having esteem issues, or, you know, I'm more patient, you know, more will be revealed. I don't need to fix everything right now, because that's a big thing for me. All right, there's a problem. How do I fix? I got to fix this. Got to fix it. I can't sit with this feeling. Yeah. But like, you know what? Just sit with it.
Yeah.
Being a worker amongst workers is another great thing that I've really adopted for myself. You know, I love being on a set. I've always loved being on sets, and I've always been, I feel like, a good coworker. And, but I've been humbled in such a way because of my sobriety and, you know, realizing that I'm no different than anyone else. And, you know, you go into these rooms in AA and you hear these stories and you go, oh, I'm not that special, you know? And so it's made me a different worker and actor, and then of course the gratitude, just like for everything, you know, not just for my sobriety, but just having moments of real gratitude for the blessings of life. Like, that sounds so whatever cliche, but I'm able to live in that. I see videos of me. Someone just posted something the other day of like me on a red carpet when I was, you know, 21, when American Pie had just come out. And, you know, I knew then it was crazy and fun and wild and whatever, but, you know, he was not leading with gratitude. I mean, he was grateful. That kid was grateful, again, because my story was sort of unique in that I was the kid actor and, unique amongst my American Pie cast, I think, in some ways. Well, Natasha was a kid actor. Anyway, my point is, I certainly was grateful for all the success that was coming, but now, if to get a success like that, it would be a totally different thing. The perspective that I have, the type of gratitude that I would have for it is totally different, Then I think I was grateful because I was like, yeah, finally, I deserve this.
Yeah.
I've been working for 16 years, 15 years. I deserve it. I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I finally
have
have
given
this.
what I deserve.
Yeah, I'm getting it. This is it.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that, I'm hooking up with girls and I'm getting, all this stuff. But now my gratitude is different.
Yeah.
It looks different.
Hear that, universe? He's ready.
Hello, I'm ready. I'm ready. Come on, please.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
No, thank you. I feel like I was kind of all over the place, but thank you for steering me back each time.
I love these conversations, and I could go for hours.
Yeah, no, you're
so many.
So wonderful. I'm speaking of gratitude. I'm grateful you reached out to me, and
Thank you.
I've learned a little bit about you after you've reached out and know a bit about your story, and it's I think it's incredible how much you're helping people by doing this. So thanks for having me on. And
I love these convos. These are my favorite ever to have, and I know that it'll help at least one person, probably more. Where can everybody find you?
Where do you find me? Biggs Jason on Instagram.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Arielle. Thanks so much.